Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode I don't know what number of Ag Fabs because Katja does that, but Katja is still unwell. So I have with me today a special guest, Renee. How are you? Welcome
Thanks,
to the Ag
Gillian.
Fab.
Thanks for having me today.
I'm so pleased you could come and join us on the podcast today. So, for those of you who don't know, Renee is a very awesome lady farmer, female farmer. What do you like to call yourself? Just a cotton farmer, plant scientist slash all round awesome human being from Queensland. So, Renee, tell us about yourself and your farm.
Yeah, so I am a mixed cropping irrigation farmer in the Central Highlands in central Queensland. So we grow a mixture of different crops, both summer and winter cropping. We are currently picking cotton, so we started this week, and then we've got some mung beans that are just been desiccated this week, so they're not far off being harvested as well. And we're currently furrowing up the cotton country that's already been picked, and that's going into irrigated chickpeas.
So the furrowing up, because we have a few listeners who aren't from a farming background, and also I have no clue what that means. Can you tell me what furrowing up means?
Yeah, sure. So this year, because we've had quite a bit of a wet pick in that cotton country, we've knocked all of our, so we sit on 1 metre beds, and we've actually had to knock them all down. Something that we don't usually do at all. We've had to go through and deep rip just to reduce some of that compaction on those particular paddocks. And we're re-pulling up those hills so that it's all nice and smooth for the chickpea. So making a really nice smooth 1 metre bed for the chickpeas to be planted into. And so we plant using a row unit. It's quite different to broadacre sort of dryland cropping. And we have furrows. So we've got the hills and the furrows. So we're forming those hills, and then the irrigation water actually runs down those furrows to a tail drain.
Oh, yep, I understand now. So what we might do, Renee, is I'll get you to send me some photos of that so we can put it up so people who may have never seen irrigated cotton before can actually have a look at how your paddocks look and how rough they would be on a motorbike if you accidentally went out across them. Right.
You
So
definitely couldn't be riding a motorbike across them. We have taken the buggy down along the rows. I certainly wouldn't go sideways in that field.
all
You'd
right,
give yourself a
awesome.
bit of a headache.
All right, so our first topic we have today. So there's been an incident in Queensland where some enterprising people have taken themselves into a national park and killed some feral pigs. And if you're not familiar with the legislation around national parks, you're not supposed to go in there and go hunting. And they were slapped with it was a $7,000 fine. Now, anyone who's never had anything to do with feral pigs, they'll go, oh, well, yeah, they should be hunting in a national park, et cetera, et cetera. If you have had anything to do with feral pigs, you'd be like, they should be paying them $7,000 to get rid of feral pigs out of national parks because they are disease carrying, landscape wrecking, lamb eating savages with no place in our environment. So, Renee, you're from Queensland around Emerald. How many feral pigs have you got?
There's not so many on the home block, but there certainly is on the other farm. So it backs onto a couple of creeks, and they certainly love sort of foraging around those creek beds. And with cotton and grain crops, they can actually make a significant mess in those crops. They basically just plow it down. They sort of roll around in it, knock it down, and it makes it really hard to pick. I know over in Theodore, the Billawheeler and Theodore growers over in the Dawson Callide are having really significant issues with pigs at the moment. So they've got professional people in to cull some of those numbers. And yeah, I know some of the grain growers around the region, after a really dry period have really big problems, and they can be in really large mobs too. So when they move through in a really large mob, they just basically knock everything down as they move.
And they're quite revolting creatures, to be honest. They eat baby lambs, they spread disease, and so this I think Katja and I have had this discussion before about sort of the lack of management of national parks. Like the government is intent on locking up a lot of land. And I've got no objection to national parks because they protect some really unique and special parts of Australia that shouldn't be used for anything else. It should be protected. But if you're going to do that, it's not an unmanaged landscape.
Yeah, that's
And
right. It's a significant biosecurity risk to have land that's not managed, whether it's native title land, whether it's national park. So it'd be very different 100 years ago when we didn't have introduced species, but now we've got exotics, we've got feral pests, we've got all of these introduced species that left unchecked can really do some damage, not only to our environment, but to human health as well. So it requires constant management, whether it's, on our farmland, just dealing with weeds and pests, or whether it's in national parks too. And unfortunately, there's just not enough people who are doing, that land management in those national parks to keep those feral pests, whether it's, weed species or whether it's, feral pigs running around or wild brumbies. There's just not enough people managing those.
And I think it comes back to as well, like, so locking up this, well, not locking this up, but selecting this land and making it a national park's all well and good, but they never budget for these sorts of things. And if you're a landholder who joins the national parks, you do all the heavy lifting when it comes to feral animal control, weed control, and you're in trouble if you do the wrong thing. Yet parks seem to be allowed to get away with it. They're not even required to share fencing costs.
Yeah.
Which you can't, you got to be a good neighbour, and the government has the capacity to be a good neighbour, at least, put some barriers and those sorts of things up. But yeah, this is where I think some of the friction between the environment and ag sort of comes from, because we are pressed constantly to do the right thing, and if we don't, we're immediately fined and those sorts of things. While we look at the government as a landholder, and we see mismanaged land, we see land not being managed properly, we see feral animals out of control that they're not investing in control in. And I think it really needs to be addressed, because it's making conservation a lot harder than it should be. And
Yeah,
it's
that's right.
setting one sector against the other.
Yeah. And, like I just think of the weed seed banks, for example. So, along the other farm where we do run up against a creek, like it's a constant battle. So when you've got flood water that comes through, you have to really manage that land after the water's been through, because it's come through areas that haven't had weeds controlled. And, one single plant can put out hundreds and thousands of, seeds that aren't that aren't being managed. And it's not only the weed risk, but along with those weeds comes, you're creating a habitat for viruses, and also like pest habitat too. So some of those exotic species love unmanaged weeds. Yeah. So, and for us as producers, it's really important to keep on top of our pests, weeds, and diseases. It costs productivity. It also costs moisture in the soil, which we're constantly trying to conserve. So they're the sort of things that make it much more challenging for producers, and add another layer of cost as well onto production, because we're managing other people's problem.
Yeah, and it's yeah. I just wish that state and federal governments would take land management and how they interact with agriculture a lot more seriously, because it's honestly it's one rule for the rest of us, and they get to do whatever they like, it seems. And I acknowledge the fact that national parks are under resourced, but you can't. It's like buying a house and then refusing to do any maintenance, and then wring your hands when it falls
Repairs and
down.
maintenance. Yeah, yeah. And if you do leave a house sort of with no work done for years and years, the cost at the end is so much greater than if you just spend a little bit of time and a little bit of money each year doing those repairs and maintenance jobs that just keep things ticking along really nicely.
Yep. All right, so that's our first topic done and dusted. Now throw you in the deep end, Renee. So we've got an email address, and people send not me, because Katja monitors the email, but they send in some questions. So here's some questions from our listeners. So you get to help me answer them. Okay, so here's some ones that have come in over the past fortnight. Hi, ladies, love the podcast. Here we go. Hi, Katja and Gillian. So today it's Renee and Gillian. A friend recommended the podcast. I've been playing catch up. Sorry if you've answered this one. Do you both believe in climate change, and what strategies can be implemented to address the challenges of climate change in agriculture at a farm level? I'm new to agriculture and not off a farm. I think this is one of the things. You can't be in agriculture and ignore climate change. And your personal feelings about it at this particular point in time are very irrelevant, because it's a policy framework in which we exist. The government has said climate change exists, and you must do X things to contribute to sequestration or reducing emissions, et cetera, et cetera. So even at this point in time, it's not about whether you believe it or not. It's about having to acknowledge that it exists. And working with policymakers and working with your markets and working with everyone else to make sure that you're fitting into that, because you can't just willy-nilly and stubbornly ignore it, because it is a thing that exists out there and we have to deal with it. So you've done quite a lot of work in this space, haven't you, Renee? So what are your thoughts?
So
we can address it?
Yeah, so I've been in the Australian cotton industry for nearly 30 years now. Seems like a really long time, but I started out in farming systems research. I was with the entomology department at the Department of Primary Industries, and we were working on genetically engineered single gene cotton. And over the years, like with the research that has happened within the industry, which is a lot, looking at planting windows and stuff, my region is actually one of the regions that was identified as fairly high risk for climate change impacts. And we've actually seen that for the last 3 decades. So we've been experiencing it. We've got really high volatility, whether it's longer droughts or really high intense storms that, dump a year's worth of rain in 1 or 2 events. And we're just seeing some really significant impacts. So we've had to really look at what we're doing within our region, be more flexible with our farming systems. We've changed our planting windows. Previously you still look at some of the other areas, they can certainly plant by the calendar. We've got different flowering periods for some of those winter crops that we grow. So we've just had to really sort of partner with government and industry researchers, whether that's grains or whether that's cotton, and with CSIRO as well. And they've looked at 100 years worth of data and sort of looked at those changing conditions. There's a lot of evidence that shows it really has changed over that period. And we've had to put into place some things that, can really maximise opportunity cropping, some flexibility within the system. We've also seen one of the other impacts that other regions are starting to see. I know that the southwest of Western Australia saw some pests that they have never ever seen in their region before. I had one of the GRDC researchers ring me up to talk about our IPM experience, because integrated pest management has been really, really important here. So being a northern producer, we're exposed to some of those exotic or, pest pressure so we're the first to experience some of those pests. And you can't just go out and spray everything. Like, that's how you develop resistance really quickly. So we had to put in a whole heap of sort of area-wide management techniques and look at how we were managing insects and beneficials on the farm and really incorporate that into a system. So with the warming winters that they're seeing in WA, they've had pests move down that have never been so far south. So they're looking at how do they manage those insects that, it's new to them. And, they could really learn a lot from Central Queensland, who have been dealing with these sort of issues for the last 30 years and have implemented some really good strategies to deal with that. I think the other thing that we have had to do is really have some good forward planning with farming. And so when you are having a good year, make sure that you're putting some of that money away through FMDs, because our droughts can be quite extended periods. Like our last one was 7 years. which is a long time to manage without an income, or just ticking by with opportunity cropping. Ground cover is really, really important in those dry years too. So making sure that we do have really good ground cover. The other thing in those hot, dry periods is having, buffers along your field so that it's not just exposed to really hot, dry winds that are moving across the system, across those fields, and, blowing your topsoil into town as well. So just really thinking about the whole management, not only the farm, but how you're working with other growers within your area too, to try and combat some of those larger area-wide issues.
I actually was at a climate change conference today in Adelaide on behalf of the South Australian livestock industry, and it was really interesting that the vast majority of people there didn't know the gains and the work the livestock industry around Australia has been putting in to reduce its emissions, to improve sequestration on farm, all of those sorts of things. So we've got a really good story to tell, because I think agriculture gets used as the whipping horse, especially animal agriculture, because you cannot stop cows from burping and sheep, even though they do it a little bit less. You can't stop them from doing that. And it's like, okay, well, let's just get rid of all the ruminants and then we'll solve climate change. But I don't think it's actually that simple. So it was good to be able to go to an urban audience with a good story to tell and sort of explain to them what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing it and how we're paying for it ourselves out of our levy dollars, paying for that research. So that was a big bonus. So we probably haven't answered that listener's question completely, but we've given a brief overview of what we know about climate change and how we deal with it. So
I was just going to say, one of the other things that we have really sort of implemented, and it's been we've been doing it for a really long time. So we identified denitrification, which sounds like a really large word, but I'll just try and explain it really quickly. So if you've put nitrogen into your soil for a lot of our summer cropping actually needs nitrogen added to the soil.
Is that like a fertilizer? What does the nitrogen do?
Yep. So nitrogen's a fertilizer. Yep. And one of the risks that comes with growing an irrigated crop is waterlogging. So it's really important that we monitor the water that goes onto the field, ensuring it goes off really quickly so that we're not waterlogging that soil, because that's when that nitrogen will actually turn into a gas. And so denitrification is fertilizer leaving that soil and going up into the air. And that's an emission risk for us as farmers. So monitoring that soil moisture, making sure it's only applied when those plants need it, and really looking at those forecasts really closely, which seems to be harder and harder now with that unreliability of forecasting. It's making things a little bit difficult.
And it also doesn't help that the BOM keeps closing down their weather stations instead of building more weather stations.
Yeah. And we've got weather stations on all the farms.
There.
Yeah. We've got weather stations on each of the farms, and then also our grower network put weather stations sort of around. We've got one every 5 kilometres, so that we can all share that weather data as well, which is really good. But there's lots of canopy sensors, so looking at, is the crop stressed, and really applying that water really efficiently to try and reduce some of those emission risks that we do have on farm. So technology's been and same with animal production, they're looking at the seaweed and other additives to add to that animal feed to try and reduce those emissions. So I think farmers are always looking at innovative ways to reduce, what they do on farm. Inputs are really expensive. We don't want to be wasting them. So, and it's the same with the emissions in that emission space. Like what can we do to reduce our environmental impact? And I think Australian farmers do a really good job of, using those innovative techniques and keeping up with technology on farms.
Yes, because one of the people I spoke to today at the conference is from SARDI, which is a South Australian Research and Development something. But anyway, they do scientific research on behalf of the agricultural industry. So they've built a an analog of a ruminant's digestive system. So you can send them a sample of what your cow or sheep or whatever might eat, and they feed it through the system and they measure it at certain times. And so they are measuring from the feed the total methane emissions. So you no longer have to like have the whole cow and make the cow wear the mask and all that sort of thing. They've just got the actual sort of septic tank type system of the animal's digestive tract, and they measure the methane out of that. So you don't even have to have the animal there anymore. You can just pick up your pasture and send it down to the lab, and they'll test it and say, okay, so your average emissions for an animal of this size are going to be X, Y, and Z, which makes calculating what your emissions actually are a lot easier. The science plays a massive part in this.
Yeah. And I don't think people realise how much, science so today I was at the Newcastle University Science and Engineering Challenge, and one of the things the kids asked me is, how does this fit within agriculture? And like agriculture, honestly, is applied science, technology, engineering, and maths. And there is so much that goes into what we do on a daily basis that sort of is evidence-based and that applied science.
Yeah. All right, so the next one is a little bit more fun, a little bit things. So, hi, ladies, not a farmer, but an animal lover. Feel like I'm in good company when I listen because a few times you've mentioned collecting animals yourselves. My question is, inside animals or outside animals? So we've had at our house, we've had an inside chicken and an inside duck. They were both owned by the kids that they then had to go outside because they shit everywhere, being poultry. We've got inside cats. Long time before I got interested in how much wildlife cats were eating, I used to have an outside cat and he got old and died. But yeah, but inside cats. Dogs, definitely for me, outside because they're gross. And they do gross things, especially my dog. He goes down to the dump and brings back dead things all the time. So he's just too rotten. He couldn't even come near the house. So how many pets have you got, Renee, and where do they live?
Yeah, so I've recently acquired 6 new chickens. They've got a very fancy Cluckingham Palace. So they've got their own outdoor, very fancy little area. It used to be my greenhouse, actually, and I've converted that to the chook pen with a really large outdoor run. But every afternoon, they get let outside to go and sort of forage in the garden and clean up any insects. I have 2 cats which are inside majority of the time. They actually follow me around. So if I'm outside in the garden with the chooks, they'll come and hang out outside with me, but they live inside. So they're inside cats that are allowed to come outside. I've got so many different birds here. You've probably seen my photos. I've got 5 different little families of fairy wrens in the garden at the moment. So I really love the wildlife that we've got around here. We've got microbats as well that live in the tree just outside the house here. And, there's so much research now on the damage that cats can do to our native species. So protecting them is really important. So inside cats, unless they're hanging around watching the chooks with me. And then I have 2 dogs, which are way too smelly to be inside. They are both farm dogs, although one is a little dashhound cross beagle, and he's the most amazing rat / mouse / rabbit hunter you've ever seen. And the other fellow, he is a cross between a cattle dog and a buffhead. I'm not sure what his other buffhead component is, but they're really funny, the 2 of them together. That when I'm starting siphons, they go along in front of me and check every siphon, and they'll tell me when there's a mouse in there, and they're sniffing along the rows, and they'll have one on each end. So one's barking at the top end, the other one's waiting for the mouse to come out, and they'll pick up the siphon, give it a shake, and then catch that, and then they'll swap ends. So they're sharing the love so that they each get to eat a mouse.
So I know what starting siphons are because I've actually seen it happen before. So for our listeners and our YouTube very passionate people who do actually watch, I don't know why they do it, but anyway, what is starting a siphon and how do you do that?
Yeah, actually, I have a really good YouTube video that you should all go and check out. So, Cotton Info, if you go onto the Cotton Info YouTube page, there is one called Starting Siphons, and that's me starting the siphons a really long time ago. I think it's probably, I don't know, 10 or 12 years old now, that video. So, we actually use siphons. It's a black pipe, it's about 2 meters long, and we've got all different sizes between half an inch right up to 2 inches in diameter. And they are what we use to get the water out of the head ditch, which is at the top of the field. So we have like a channel with water in it. It's only got water in it for less than 24 hours. And the siphons actually go over the top of the bank and then they siphon the water over the bank and down each row of whatever crop it is we're growing. So it's like, when you start your siphon fuel out of your car. Have you ever seen that?
But you're not there with a 2-inch pipe, surely.
No. So you'll have to watch the cotton info video. It's actually I can't show you. I don't want to show you now. It looks a little bit weird.
I'll put the link in the socials so you can watch.
Now you've just made me go red. So basically to siphon the water out of the pipe from the head ditch into the pipe. So when you're pushing the siphon into the head ditch, you've got your hand off the end of the pipe. When you're pulling it through to make it run down the row, you're actually you've got your hand, let me think about this. Yeah, when you're pulling the water into the row, you've got your hand over the end of the pipe, and it creates like a suction to get that water out of the ditch onto the lower side where the paddock is and down each row. So that water will run between sort of 8 and 10 hours down each row. Then it gets stopped. We've got a tailwater drain at the bottom of that particular field, and then there's a recycling dam which captures all the tailwater off that farm, and then we get to reuse it in the next field. So it's a bit of a closed circuit sort of system, so that we keep all the water that we use on farm.
So despite what we're told, we're not just all out here willy-nilly wasting water and things like that. We're actually using it very responsibly and every last drop to grow as much as we possibly can of food and fibre. So
water's expensive. So we've got sensors all over the field. So we've got them in the ground measuring soil moisture. We've got them looking at the temperature. So we actually water plants to keep cool, and because they use evapotranspiration, so they breathe that water out of their out of the leaves to keep themselves nice and cool. So we've got canopy sensors monitoring how hot those leaves are, and that gives us a really good indicator of when they need that water. And we really don't want to keep it on the field very long either, because that's when you create that waterlogging, which means your plants can't take up its nutrients out of the soil. So like us, if we were, full and trying to eat more, you just don't have the capacity to take in the nutrients. So making sure, that those nutrients are available to the plants are really important too.
All right. So our next topic is something that you don't know anything about because it's of zero interest to you, but it's of great interest to a lot of our listeners, is Farmer Wants a Wife. So why don't you watch it, Renee? What have you got against love? What's wrong with you?
I just actually don't watch a lot of telly, to be honest. I do a lot of reading. I do some binge Netflix series. I've just started watching series 5 of The Handmaid's Tale because they're streaming series 6 on SBS On Demand. But I'm not a reality TV person at all. I just find it a little bit cringy. I'm really sorry. I know everyone loves it. I see it all over the socials quite regularly. It's definitely not my thing.
Yeah,
but good luck to those people who want to find a wife or a husband.
Not that this will be of any interest to you, but there's been a bit of gossip around. There's one farmer who's from Billawheeler. Some of my old school friends live in Billawheeler. So I reached out to them and asked them, like, what is the inside track on this lad? And they said he is the most lovely bloke. He's such a hard worker. That's the only reason he doesn't have a partner. He just hasn't taken the time. They're all members of the local cricket tennis club, and they're just so excited for him to find his partner that they couldn't be happier for him. And that's really good to hear, because it's been my experience getting around the bush for many years. When you find someone who's in their late 20s to mid to early 40s and they're not married, there's generally a really good reason for that. And it's generally because they're not a very nice person.
Well, I would say, I notice, farmers they seem to work a lot more than they, no, probably not that they work a lot more than they used to, but it's much harder to find extra people to work on your farm. So people are putting in a lot of hours. So that really reduces their capacity, to go out and socialize and meet people. And I think the whole dating world is very different these days compared to 20 or 30 years ago or 50 years ago, when you did used to go out to you went to the local pub, or you went to the local dance, or your community events at church, or all of the different things that used to happen. And it's a very different world with social media, and a lot of people just meet online. And I think for farmers too, trying to coordinate their schedules is quite difficult. People, I just think it'd be a really difficult world these days, trying to go and find someone that you're madly in love with in this day and age, and then, working on farm. So, for that fellow, it's probably a great way to, get off the farm and go and meet some new people.
Have a bit of fun. You're only young once. I think it's also the fact that there's declining sort of partnership rates or whatever in the bushes is indicative of our declining regional communities, because there's less people coming to regional towns. So they close this local school down, for example, because there's not enough kids. So all of a sudden there's teachers not going there. Because in the small country town where I grew up, all the nurses and teachers eventually married a local grazier, or, because they didn't want, they were related. The people who grew up there were all related to everyone else. And so a new, fresh blood had come outside of town. And so they'd marry a teacher, or they'd marry a nurse. And that doesn't happen in a lot of communities now.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, we were talking about politics a little bit earlier, and this is where I think, that regional investment is really, really important. I think, my town is very different to a lot of other rural and regional towns, because we've got such diversity in industries. It's not just a agricultural town. So we've got mining, we've got railway, we've got all the different service industries for each of those different things. And we're also like a central hub for a lot of the other surrounding districts as well. I think if government can sort of really partner with communities and trying to attract other industries, it will help some of those issues around bringing new people in. It's generally, I was going to say, in most instances, it's much easier to buy a house, or it's cheaper to buy a house than, a $2 million house in Sydney at the moment. And there's a lot of local government and councils that do try and do some really cool initiatives to attract people into their town with cheaper blocks and much cheaper houses. And so I think we need to think outside of the box on how do we attract people into rural and regional communities, because there's so many different opportunities. And, I really love my community. I think we've got nearly 14,500 people here, but it's a hugely diverse community. We've got lots and lots of people from all over the world live in Emerald. It's a very multicultural town. We even have a multicultural festival. There's so many different people.
That's really cool. I really love hearing about the success stories of regional communities, and because it isn't something you hear very often. It's usually like, oh, well, everyone packed up and left town, and that was the end of that, and now everyone's gone. Then they come back a couple of years later and pick up all the houses and take them away too. So it is
Yeah.
really good to hear that there are some thriving regional communities out there. So if you live in a thriving regional community and would like to give your town a shout out, please drop a comment in the notes below, and we would love to shout out your town if you're having a really great time of it. And if you've got any inside information about any of the Farmers Wants a Wife guys, please let us know. I have got a hot update from the Farmer Wants a Wife contestant over on the Eyre Peninsula, but I'm not going to let it out yet. So you'll have to listen again next week to get the scoop on him. So, Renee, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us, or anything you want to talk about today? About, you know, what do you think is something that we should be paying attention to?
We could talk about the election.
Oh, we could talk about the election, and we probably should actually, because it's really important and it is going to have a big impact on Australian agriculture. And it was very interesting. The first working day after the election, I did some media for local SA radio, where again I asked for the federal government to take agriculture more seriously as an industry, because without agriculture, there is no society. We support everything else that exists in the world. Again, asked Anthony Albanese or Julie Collins to come and visit our drought-stricken farmers in South Australia, because and our farmers in South Australia are starting to get really jack of it, actually, because they saw the big hullabaloo over Queensland. Not saying that Queensland didn't deserve it, because the floods that came through there were very devastating. But South Australia, because we're such a strong Labor state, seems to always be like, oh, well, they don't need any of our attention because they're going to vote for Labor anyway. And that's a pretty disappointing attitude from people who are meant to be governing for the whole country.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I sort of looked, and I've been involved with agri-politics now, I think it's 15 years, but one of the things that I asked people was what have they learned, or what was sort of forming their decision. And I think looking at what's happening in the US has really scared a lot of people. And it's had a fairly significant influence, especially for women and that younger generation. They didn't want to see those policies move into Australia, and I would like to think that we're quite different. I saw a really interesting interview this morning with this young fellow. I was talking to Oscar Pearce about this earlier today. He was an American fellow he was backpacking in Ireland. And he was interviewing this Irish fellow, and he said, I just had no idea that your country was free in the same way that the US is free. And the fellow said, what do you mean? He said, I thought we were the only country that had freedom. And he's like, you realize most of the world is a free country, but they've grown up thinking that they were, this amazing country. They're the only ones that free, and everyone else was under this really strict rules and regulations and, lockdowns. And it was really eye-opening. And the Irish fellow sort of said to him, where did you learn this? And he said, we have learned this every day at school for our whole entire education, that all of these other countries had no sort of freedom. And, growing up with propaganda like that and I'm now starting to see it with young women on TikTok as well, just, the ideas that they have grown up with and all of the things that they've been told their whole life. And now that they're traveling and getting outside of the country, they realize that the world is nothing like they thought it was. And I think Australians,
North Korea-ish, doesn't it? There's
it does. Yep. And they've just grown up with a very, very narrow view of what's going on in the rest of the world. And you sort of hear them do interviews sometimes, and you're like, they really weren't listening in class, some of them. So yeah, it's been interesting to ask people what they thought. And I do think what's happening with the uber wealthy over in the US, and watching some of the democracy just be, I feel like it's being destroyed daily every time I wake up in the morning and I look at what's happening in the US. And we're really lucky we have this independent, the Australian Electoral Commission. We've got fabulous democracy, so people really do get to choose what they want for Australia. So, that is one really good thing. What I'd love to see from Australian politics is more of that co-design. So working much more closely with industry to make better decisions that not only work for the government, for the environment, for communities, but also for the industries that they're involved with. I think making decisions over the top really doesn't work. And, we've got a lot of research that shows that. So doing more in conjunction to make those really good sound policy decisions with industry is really, really beneficial. And they'll have more trust from producers and more, more buyback, I guess, more follow through on some of those decisions if they're made from, grassroots, working with grassroots producers and then industry as well.
I'd really like to see us accepted as the experts in our field that we are, because so often agricultural policy is influenced by animal activists, by environmental activists, and so sort of agriculture's chopped up and diluted, and then the minute you say, what about us, the actual people in this industry? Oh, well, that's a vested interest. Your opinions can't be taken seriously. It's literally our job to do this every day.
Yeah.
So I think and we invest our own money in it. So I think we should be taken seriously.
Yeah, that's right. We've certainly got skin in the game, and we're working alongside other other experts as well. So it's not just us and our opinion. We utilise government researchers and government extension officers and then independent consultants. We've got this amazing team of experts sort of surrounding us. So it's not just our opinion that we're making or saying things, on a whim. It's definitely, it's what we're paid to do, and we do really well. So I think valuing our opinions, which is backed by research, I think is incredibly important.
It's got to have a little sip of my drink. I'm in a motel, so I've got a fancy little glass, a little straw.
I've got some spicy water. I've got some sparkling water tonight.
Yeah, no, it's and politics and the influence, and people say, oh, why do you care so much about what happens in America? And there's an old saying, and I don't even know where it's come from, but America sneezes and the rest of the world catches a cold. So but I did hear on the radio today as I was driving into Adelaide from the farm that Putin is visiting China and is having a state-sponsored visit in China. So what the hell, I'm not very comfortable with that, that's for sure. But I think, I'm not comfortable with any of it all. But who knows where it's going to lead Australia. I just want us to be safe, and I want us to be able to pay our bills and sell our produce to people who need to buy it.
Yeah.
And India and Pakistan are kicking off, which is not great because there's so many people live there and they both have nuclear capabilities, and that's a bit concerning as well. There's just so much uncertainty. I don't like it. I've got enough to worry about. I don't need to worry about anything else.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of sort of instability globally. There's so much hhinning, and sometimes I just think, goodness, we're so lucky here to be in Australia. And as much as people will whinge about the whoever is in government at the time, I do think the majority of them have our best intentions at heart, regardless of which party is in. You look at, I think they're held accountable a lot more than some of the other countries. So yeah.
I'm just glad that we're Australians, because we don't, as a nation, we generally don't stand for that sort of shenanigans that you see happening, where some countries elevate their leader to this position of almost godhood. And it's not just America that is doing that now. And Americans, it's all about that patting themselves on the back. I think it's well, look at us, our leader's the best because we're the best. It doesn't matter how rubbish their leader is. It's just they can't acknowledge it, even if they are rubbish, because then it would mean their country is rubbish. And so there are other countries around that sort of, our leader's so smart he or she could never make a poor decision while they're merrily leading their country towards famine and war. But it's
a little bit hubristic, isn't it? And I think, in Australia, I think if you've got a really good team around you, I think the leader's role isn't the be all and end all here in Australia. There's a really large team of people sort of trying to work together to make the best decisions. It's not one person sort of thumping his chest and feeling like
Which
he's
is sort of
fabulous.
good because we went through a period there where we were getting rid of prime ministers left, right, and centre. So there's lucky they had a team behind them who could pick up the slack. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It'll be
I know
interesting to
Australia's
see
not
what
perfect,
happens.
but
Yeah.
we're not perfect,
Mm.
but we're pretty bloody good, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And I do think, yeah, I feel really lucky to have been, born in Australia. It's not as though it's something that we can choose to do. So, and yeah, there's a lot of conflict around the world at the moment, and yeah, there's a lot of places that I'd really rather not be. So I'm very thankful that I get to be here.
Yep. All things considered, apart from the snakes and the spiders and the sharks, I think we're pretty safe here generally.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're a bit sensible. Renee, it's been so lovely having you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for stepping into the role to be my co-host today.
Thanks,
We'll
Gillian. Thanks
we'll
for
keep
having
you on
me.
speed dial for if I'm away or if Katja's away again, because I think this could become a regular feature where we swap one of us out and bring in another amazing woman in agriculture in Australia and let them co-host the podcast. I'm really feeling that vibe. I think that would be great. So if you want to nominate to co-host Absolutely Fabulous, make sure you reach out and let us know. And we would love to have you on the show. I haven't discussed this with Katja yet because this will become a great surprise to her when she listens to this. Nothing like consulting with your partner before you actually make a decision. But I really think I'm really feeling the love here. I think we need to bring some more people into the, just in case I break my leg or end up stuck in Canberra or Adelaide or something and can't record the podcast for a while, or Katja has baby duties or something like that. We need to be able to keep producing quality content of the type that we actually do. So
And
thanks for
I
listening,
hope Katja
everyone.
recovers really quickly and is back on the mend and can take over from me jumping in at the last minute. But I'm really grateful that you contacted me and asked me to come and join you for this evening. So thank you very much, Gillian, and
No
thank
worries.
you to everyone that's listened.
Thanks, Renee. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And I'll talk to you later. Bye.